Hello and welcome back to the Cosmic Enigma. Here we share real-life experiences of encounters with the unknown, stories that come from beyond the stars, crafted to help you relax and drift off to sleep. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. I love seeing just how far this mystery reaches. Now find a comfortable spot, take a deep breath, and let yourself be carried away. Story 1. It rustled softly like dry leaves stirred by an unfelt breeze. The sound wove its way into my thoughts as I stepped into the dimly lit room, the faint smell of old paper lingering in the corners. Instinctively, I glanced at the window, its glass cold to the touch and firmly shut against the world outside. The rustling persisted, an insistent echo that shouldn't have been audible in this sealed space. My eyes traced the outlines of the shelves, each cluttered with items long forgotten. A shiver passed through me as I recognized a sensation more than sound, a warm autumn afternoon, distant yet intimately recalled. I was drawn toward the closet, its wooden doors slightly ajar, where nothing should be moving. The air thickened with an odd familiarity, and a quiet urgency thrummed beneath my skin. I hadn't heard that sound since the day everything changed. But nothing really changed. That's the thing I need to make clear right from the start. Nothing happened that afternoon. I was probably just tired, maybe coming down with something. You know how your mind plays tricks when you're not feeling well. The whole thing was just my imagination running wild, creating problems where none existed. I remember walking through the house that afternoon, though I'm not sure why I was there in the first place. Must have been looking for something, though I can't recall what. The rooms felt different somehow, but that was just because I hadn't been there in a while. Houses settle, you know, they make sounds. The floorboards creak differently when the weather changes, and it had been raining for days. I didn't see anything unusual. The hallway looked exactly like it always had, with that same faded wallpaper and the carpet that needed replacing. Though I do remember thinking the shadows seemed longer than they should have been for that time of day, but that was just the clouds blocking the sun. Simple explanation, nothing mysterious about it. The temperature felt wrong, though I'm sure it was just the old heating system acting up again. Too warm in some places, too cold in others. I found myself shivering even though sweat was beading on my forehead. Probably just a fever coming on. That would explain the whole thing, really. When you're sick, everything feels distorted. I didn't hear any voices. That's important to understand. There were no voices calling my name from empty rooms, just the house settling, maybe some pipes rattling in the walls. Old houses make all kinds of sounds. The fact that it sounded almost like whispers was purely coincidental. And the way it seemed to be coming from behind me, following me from room to room, that was just acoustics. Sound bounces off walls in strange ways. The doors were all closed when I arrived, I'm certain of that. I never opened the door to the basement, for instance. So I couldn't possibly know that the stairs were darker than usual, or that the air down there felt thick and heavy like water. I definitely didn't notice how the third step from the top creaked in a different pitch than before, almost musical. These are just details my mind invented later, trying to make sense of a perfectly ordinary afternoon. I wasn't drawn to the attic either. I had no reason to go up there. The pull I felt, that strange compulsion to climb those narrow stairs, was just restlessness. Maybe I thought I heard something scurrying around up there, but it was probably just mice. The mice don't usually move in such deliberate patterns, starting and stopping like they're listening for something. And they don't make that soft scratching sound that almost resembles writing, like pencil on paper. The light up there wasn't behaving strangely. Light doesn't behave strangely. It was just the usual dusty sunbeam filtering through the small window, illuminating the stored boxes and forgotten furniture. The way it seemed to bend around certain objects, creating shadows that didn't match their shapes, that was just an optical illusion. My eyes were tired, maybe strained from the dim lighting throughout the house. I didn't touch anything while I was up there. My hand stayed firmly at my sides the entire time, so I couldn't have known that the old trunk in the corner was warm to the touch, or that the metal clasps were slightly damp despite the dry air. I certainly didn't lift the lid and peer inside, which means I never saw the contents arranged in perfect rows, items I recognized but couldn't name, each one positioned with mathematical precision. The photographs weren't there. I need to be very clear about this. There were no photographs scattered across the attic floor, and I definitely didn't kneel down to examine them. The faces looking back at me from those images, familiar yet wrong somehow, were just figments of my imagination. People I knew but had never met, standing in places I'd been but had never visited. The way their eyes seemed to track my movement as I shifted position, that was just a trick of the light and shadow. I wasn't in those photographs, that's impossible. I was the one looking at them, so how could I also be in them? The figure in the background of each image, partially obscured but unmistakably me, wearing clothes I didn't recognize in rooms I'd never entered, that was just someone who happened to look similar. A coincidence, though the birthmark on the left shoulder was in exactly the same place as mine, and the scar above the right eyebrow matched perfectly. The sound of footsteps below me was just the house settling. Old wood expands and contracts, creating noises that can sound remarkably like someone walking around. The steady rhythm, the deliberate pace, the way they seem to pause outside each room as if searching for something, all of that was just my mind imposing patterns where none existed. And when the footsteps stopped directly below where I was standing, that was pure coincidence. I didn't call out. There was no reason to call out because there was nobody there. The silence that followed wasn't expectant or listening. Silence is just the absence of sound. It doesn't have qualities like patience or awareness. The way it seemed to press against my eardrums, thick and almost tangible, that was just my imagination. Though I do remember holding my breath without realizing it, as if making noise might somehow be dangerous. The basement door wasn't open when I came back downstairs. I'm absolutely certain it was closed when I first arrived, and I never opened it, so it couldn't have been standing wide open with that rectangle of deeper darkness beyond. The cool air that seemed to flow up from below, carrying that metallic scent I mentioned earlier, was probably just a draft from somewhere else in the house. Old houses are full of drafts. I didn't go down there. My feet never touched those basement stairs, which means I couldn't describe the way they felt under my shoes, slightly soft and yielding like they were made of something other than wood. The handrail wasn't unusually cold, and it didn't seem to pulse slightly under my palm as if it had a heartbeat. These are all details I couldn't possibly know because I never went down there. The basement wasn't larger than it should have been. Basements are what they are, defined by the foundation of the house above. They don't extend beyond those boundaries, no matter how the walls seem to stretch away into darkness that the light couldn't penetrate. The additional rooms I didn't see, with their strange furnishings and that persistent rustling sound, were just products of an overactive imagination. The workshop area wasn't set up like someone had been using it recently. The tools weren't arranged with careful precision, and there wasn't a thin layer of metal shavings covering the workbench. The half-finished project clamped in the vise, something that looked almost like a key but with too many teeth and angles that hurt to look at directly, was never there. I didn't run my finger along its edge and feel how sharp it was, sharp enough to cut without any pressure at all. The cut on my finger healed quickly. Just a small nick from somewhere, maybe a rough edge on a door frame or a splinter from the old wooden banister. The fact that it was in exactly the spot where I would have touched that impossible key was coincidence. And the way it bled more than it should have, drops falling to the basement floor and disappearing into the concrete like water into sand, that was just my imagination making the injury seem worse than it was. I didn't find the door behind the furnace. There was no door there, which means I couldn't have opened it and looked into the room beyond. The space that stretched back further than the house's foundation should have allowed, lit by a source I couldn't identify, was never there. The walls lined with shelves, each holding identical glass containers filled with something that moved when I wasn't looking directly at it, were just a dream I had later. The containers weren't labeled with dates I recognized, dates that corresponded to specific days in my life, days when something had felt off or wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on what. The contents weren't samples of some kind, though they seemed organic, almost familiar, like pieces of memory made tangible, floating in that clear fluid that might not have been fluid at all. I didn't take one of the containers. My hands never closed around the cool glass, and I never held it up to the light to get a better look at what was inside. The way the content seemed to recognize me, pressing against the glass like it wanted to get out, was just my imagination. And when I thought I heard my own voice whispering from inside the container, telling me things I didn't want to remember, that was clearly impossible. The container didn't break when I dropped it. There was no container to break, and the sound of glass shattering against the concrete floor was just something from outside, maybe a neighbor's window or a bottle falling from a garbage truck. The way the content spread across the floor, moving with purpose rather than following gravity, was just how liquids behave when they spill. Though most liquids don't try to flow back toward your feet, and they don't whisper your name as they move. I left immediately after that. Well, not immediately, because there was nothing to leave after. I simply finished whatever I had come to do and walked out of the house like any normal person would. The way my legs felt weak and unsteady, the way my hands shook as I reached for the front door handle, that was just fatigue. I'd been on my feet too long, that's all. The door handle wasn't warm under my palm, and it didn't seem to pulse with that same rhythmic beat I'd felt in the basement handrail. Door handles are made of metal, and metal conducts temperature from your skin. That's basic physics. The fact that it felt like it was alive, like it was aware of my touch and responding to it, was just my overactive imagination making something ordinary seem sinister. I didn't look back as I walked away. There was no reason to look back, which means I couldn't have seen the figure standing in the upstairs window, watching me leave. The silhouette that looked exactly like me but somehow wrong, like a photograph negative or a reflection that didn't quite match, was never there. And the way it raised its hand in a gesture that might have been a wave or a warning, that was just shadows moving behind the glass. The house looked perfectly normal from the outside. Just another old building on a quiet street, nothing special or unusual about it. The way the windows seemed to watch me as I walked away, tracking my movement like eyes, was just the angle of the glass catching the light, and the fact that I could still hear that rustling sound even after I was too far away for any sound to carry, that was just the wind in the trees. I slept well that night. No dreams, no disturbances, just the peaceful rest of someone with a clear conscience and nothing to worry about. I didn't wake up multiple times thinking I heard that same rustling sound coming from inside my own house, moving from room to room like it was looking for something. The scratching at my bedroom door was just a tree branch scraping against the outside wall, even though there are no trees near that side of the house. My reflection looked normal in the bathroom mirror the next morning, exactly like it always had, with no strange shadows or distortions. The way it seemed to lag slightly behind my movements, like it was copying me rather than being me, was just tiredness affecting my perception. And when I thought I saw it smile while my own face remained neutral, that was clearly just a trick of the light. The cut on my finger was gone, completely healed, not even a scar to mark where it had been. Small cuts heal quickly, that's perfectly normal. The fact that there was no scab, no sign that there had ever been an injury there at all, just proved it hadn't been as serious as I'd thought. Though I do remember the blood and how much there had been, more than a small cut should produce. I haven't been back to that house. There's no reason to go back because there's nothing there for me. just an empty building with ordinary rooms and normal shadows. The dreams I've been having about it, the ones where I walk through those same hallways and find new doors I didn't notice before, are just my subconscious processing a mundane experience and making it seem more significant than it was. The rustling sound I hear sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet, is just the heating system or maybe mice in the walls. It's not the same sound I heard that afternoon because that sound was never real to begin with, and the way it seems to be getting closer, moving from room to room like it's searching for me, that's just my imagination connecting unrelated noises and creating a pattern that isn't there. Everything is perfectly normal now. My life continues exactly as it did before that afternoon, with no changes or disturbances. I sleep well, I eat regularly, I go about my daily routine without any problems. The only difference is that sometimes I find myself standing in front of closets with the doors slightly open, listening for something I can't name, but that's just a coincidence. The sound is getting stronger now, more insistent, but there is no sound, so it can't be getting stronger. It's just my imagination, and imagination can't hurt you. Even when it feels like something is moving through the house, checking each room systematically, getting closer to where I'm sitting right now. Even when I can hear it just outside the door, that soft rustling like dry leaves, patient and persistent and somehow familiar. I should probably check what's making that noise, just to prove to myself that it's nothing important. Story 2. I had just wiped the faint dust from the table. The cloth slipped deftly over its surface, leaving a whisper of cleanliness behind. A faint metallic scent lingered in the air, lodging itself in the back of my throat like an uninvited thought. My arm brushed against the edge, and a soft tremor shivered across my skin, as if the room itself had drawn a breath in anticipation. I paused, sensing the unnoticed had shifted, but nothing seemed misplaced. Yet the air felt different, charged, as if it awaited something unbidden. That's where it starts, where I think it starts. The memory floats there like oil on water, refusing to mix with everything else that came before or after. I've been trying to piece together what happened, but the fragments won't align properly. They slide against each other, creating gaps where something important should be. The cloth was yellow, or maybe blue. The color keeps changing when I try to focus on it, like looking at something underwater. But the texture remains constant in my mind, rough against my fingertips, leaving tiny fibers that clung to my skin. I can still feel them sometimes, even now, when I'm sitting here trying to remember. There was a hum, not from the table, but from somewhere deeper, beneath the floorboards maybe, or inside the walls. It started low, so low I thought it was my own pulse at first. But pulses don't sustain that way, don't build into something that makes your teeth ache. The sound wrapped around my skull like a tight band, pressing inward until I had to shake my head to clear it. I remember walking to the window. The glass was cold against my palm, and I left a handprint there that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. Outside, everything looked normal. The same view I'd seen countless times before, but something about the angles felt wrong, as if the perspective had shifted just enough to make me dizzy. The figure was standing by the fence, motionless, so still that I initially mistook it for a post or a shadow cast by something I couldn't see. But shadows don't have that weight, that presence that makes the air around them feel thicker. I watched for what felt like hours, waiting for movement, for any sign of life. Nothing. Just that terrible stillness that seemed to spread outward like ripples in dark water. My breath fogged the glass, and when it cleared, the figure was gone. Or maybe it had never been there at all. The uncertainty gnaws at me now, makes me question every detail I think I remember. Did I really see it? Or did my mind create something to fill the void where understanding should be? The metallic taste grew stronger. It coated my tongue, made everything I tried to swallow feel like pennies sliding down my throat. I went to the kitchen sink and let the water run, cupping it in my hands and drinking deeply, but the taste remained. It wasn't coming from outside. It was rising up from somewhere inside me, as if my own blood had changed composition. There's a gap here, a space where time should be but isn't. I remember the kitchen, the running water, the taste of metal. Then I remember being back at the table, but the cloth was gone. My hands were empty, and there were marks on the surface that hadn't been there before. Circular impressions, as if something heavy had been pressed down repeatedly. The wood was warm under my touch, almost feverish. The hum had changed pitch, higher now, more insistent. It seemed to be coming from multiple directions at once, creating a harmony that shouldn't have been possible. I pressed my palms against my ears, but the sound didn't diminish. If anything, it grew clearer, as if blocking external noise had somehow amplified whatever was generating the frequency from within. I think I called out. My voice sounded strange in the charged air, muffled and distant, as if I were speaking through water. No one answered, but I hadn't expected anyone to. I was alone in the house, I'm sure of that much. The solitude was complete, absolute, pressing down on me like a physical weight. But then there were footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from somewhere above. The ceiling creaked with each step, and dust motes danced in the air, caught in shafts of light that seemed too bright for the time of day. I counted the steps 7, 8, 9 before they stopped directly overhead. The silence that followed was worse than the sound had been. I remember looking up at the ceiling, tracing the path the footsteps had taken. The plaster was unmarked, pristine white, but I could swear I saw impressions forming as I watched. Shallow depressions that appeared and vanished so quickly I might have imagined them. The house was settling, I told myself. Old houses make sounds. Old houses shift and creak and play tricks on the mind. The light behind the door started then. A thin line of illumination seeping out from beneath, golden and warm and completely wrong. That door led to a closet. There was no light source inside, no electrical connection, nothing that could produce that steady glow. Yet there it was, pulsing gently like a heartbeat made visible. I approached the door slowly, each step feeling like I was walking through thick syrup. The air had weight now, substance that resisted movement. My hand reached for the knob, fingers trembling not from fear but from something deeper, more primal. The metal was hot against my skin, almost burning, but I couldn't let go. Another gap, this one feels deliberate, as if my mind has built a wall around whatever happened next. I remember the heat of the doorknob, the golden light, the sensation of turning my wrist, then nothing. A void where experience should be, dark and impenetrable as deep water. When awareness returned, I was sitting on the floor. My back was against the wall and my legs were stretched out in front of me like a child's. The door was closed, the light was gone. But the taste of metal had intensified until it was all I could perceive, coating not just my tongue but the inside of my nose, my throat, even the surface of my eyes. My clothes were different, not completely different, but wrong in small ways that accumulated into something deeply unsettling. The fabric felt rougher, the fit slightly off, as if I were wearing a copy of my own garments made by someone who had only seen them from a distance. The buttons were in the right places, but they felt different under my fingers, smoother, warmer, somehow more alive than buttons should be. The hum had stopped. The absence of it was like losing a sense I hadn't realized I'd developed. The silence felt incomplete, hollow, as if the world had been drained of some essential frequency. I strained to hear it again, that low thrumming that had become as familiar as my own heartbeat, but there was nothing, just the ordinary sounds of an ordinary house on an ordinary day. But nothing was ordinary anymore. The angles were still wrong, the light still too bright or too dim depending on where I looked. The air still carried that metallic scent, though fainter now, like the memory of a smell rather than the thing itself. And underneath it all was the growing certainty that something fundamental had changed. Some basic rule of existence had been quietly rewritten while I wasn't paying attention. I tried to stand and found my legs unsteady. Not weak, exactly, but unfamiliar, as if I were operating a body I'd never used before. Each movement required conscious thought, deliberate coordination between intention and action. Walking became a series of calculated steps, each one placed carefully to avoid some disaster I couldn't name. The table was clean, cleaner than it had been when I started wiping it, cleaner than it had any right to be. The surface gleamed like water, reflecting the ceiling with perfect clarity, but the reflection was wrong. The room above looked different, larger, with corners that didn't match the actual space. I leaned closer, trying to understand what I was seeing, and my reflected face looked back at me with eyes that seemed slightly too wide, slightly too knowing. There was something in my pocket, something that hadn't been there before, or maybe something I'd forgotten was there. My fingers closed around it, and the shape was familiar yet impossible to identify. Smooth in some places, rough in others, warm as if it had been sitting in sunlight for hours. When I pulled it out to look, my hand was empty, but I could still feel its weight, still sense its presence, even though nothing was there. The phone was ringing, had been ringing, I realized, for some time. The sound seemed to come from very far away, filtered through layers of distance and distortion. I followed it through the house, room to room, but I could never find the source. Each space I entered fell silent as I crossed the threshold, only to fill with ringing again as soon as I left. I found myself back at the window, though I don't remember walking there. The handprint I'd left on the glass was gone, but there were others now. Dozens of them, overlapping and intersecting, creating a pattern that hurt to look at directly. Some were larger than my hands, some smaller. Some seemed to have too many fingers, or fingers that were too long, or fingers that bent in directions that defied anatomy. The figure by the fence had returned, or maybe it had never left. Distance made details impossible, but I had the impression of stillness so complete it seemed to bend reality around it. The air shimmered near it, like heat waves rising from summer pavement, but the distortion felt cold, wrong, as if the space itself was rejecting whatever occupied it. I pressed my face against the glass, trying to see more clearly, and my breath fogged the surface again. This time when it cleared, the figure was closer, not by the fence anymore, but halfway across the yard, still motionless, still wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. The distance between us was shrinking, but I hadn't seen it move. It was simply closer, as if space itself had contracted. The metallic taste surged back, stronger than before. It filled my mouth, my nose seemed to coat the inside of my lungs with each breath. I stumbled away from the window, gasping, trying to escape the sensation, but it followed me. It was part of me now, woven into my chemistry in ways that felt permanent and deeply invasive. Another gap opens here, wider than the others, darker, with edges that seem to shift when I try to examine them. I remember the taste, the figure, the wrongness of everything around me. Then I remember waking up, though I don't remember falling asleep. The transition is missing, stolen, locked away behind barriers my mind has constructed for reasons I can't fathom. I was lying on the floor again, but in a different room. The walls were familiar yet strange, like seeing your own face in a funhouse mirror. Everything was where it should be, but nothing felt right. The proportions were off, the colors too saturated or too dim, the shadows falling at angles that defied the light sources I could see. My body ached in places that didn't make sense. Not muscle pain or joint stiffness, but something deeper, as if the ache were coming from inside my bones or from spaces between my organs where pain shouldn't be able to exist. Moving was difficult, not because of weakness, but because of a fundamental disconnect between intention and execution. The house was quiet now, completely quiet in a way that felt artificial, manufactured. Even old houses have ambient sound pipes settling, wood expanding, air moving through vents. But this silence was absolute, pressing against my eardrums like a physical presence. I could hear my own heartbeat, my own breathing, amplified and distorted until they sounded foreign, threatening. I tried to retrace my steps to find the sequence of events that had led me to this moment, but the memories wouldn't cooperate. They slipped away when I tried to grasp them, rearranged themselves when I wasn't looking directly at them. The harder I concentrated, the more elusive they became, until I was left with nothing but impressions and sensations that might have been real or might have been dreams. The cloth was in my hand again, yellow or blue, rough against my skin, leaving those tiny fibers that clung to my fingers. But I was no longer at the table. I was standing in a doorway, looking into a room I didn't recognize. The space beyond was too large, too deep, stretching away into darkness that seemed to have weight and substance. The hum returned, but different now. Multiple frequencies layering over each other, creating harmonies that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. It wasn't coming from the walls or the floor anymore. It was coming from me, rising up from somewhere deep inside, as if I had become a tuning fork struck by an invisible hand. I think I screamed. The sound that came out was mine but not mine, familiar but wrong, like hearing a recording of your own voice played at the wrong speed. It echoed in the impossible space before me, bouncing back distorted and multiplied until it became a chorus of voices that might have been mine or might have been something else entirely. The figure was behind me now. I could feel its presence without turning around, that terrible stillness pressing against my back like a cold hand. My skin crawled with the certainty of being watched, being studied, being measured by something that understood me better than I understood myself. But when I spun around, there was nothing there, just the familiar room with its wrong angles and impossible shadows. Time moved strangely after that. Moments stretched into hours, hours compressed into seconds. I would start to do something, reach for a door handle, take a step forward, open my mouth to speak, and find myself somewhere else entirely, with no memory of the transition. The house became a maze of disconnected spaces, each one familiar yet foreign, each one containing pieces of a puzzle I couldn't solve. The marks on the table had spread. Not just circular impressions now, but lines and curves that almost formed letters, almost spelled words in a language I didn't recognize but somehow understood. The wood was warm to the touch, feverish, pulsing with a rhythm that matched the hum in my bones. When I traced the marks with my finger, they seemed to shift, to complete themselves, to become something meaningful and terrible. I found myself writing, though I don't remember picking up a pen. The words flowed onto paper without conscious thought, describing events I couldn't remember experiencing, emotions I couldn't remember feeling. My handwriting looked different, similar enough to be mine, but with subtle variations that accumulated into something unsettling. The letters were too uniform, too perfect, as if written by a machine that had learned to mimic human imperfection. The phone rang again, and this time I found it. But when I lifted the receiver, there was no dial tone, no voice, just that familiar hum transmitted through the earpiece directly into my skull. I held it there for what felt like hours, listening to the sound that had become the soundtrack to my dissolution, until the plastic grew warm against my ear and began to feel organic, alive. When I finally put it down, my reflection in the window had changed again. Still recognizably me, but different in ways that made my stomach clench with recognition and revulsion. The eyes were too bright, too knowing. The smile was too wide, too satisfied. It was the face of someone who had learned something they shouldn't know, seen something they shouldn't have seen. The gaps in my memory are growing larger now, swallowing whole hours, maybe days. I find evidence of activities I don't remember: food eaten, clothes changed, words written in that perfect, terrible handwriting. The house rearranges itself when I'm not looking, rooms appearing where they shouldn't be, doors opening onto spaces that violate every law of architecture and physics. But the cloth remains constant, yellow or blue, rough against my skin, leaving those fibers that cling like memories. I carry it with me now, though I can't remember picking it up. It's become a talisman, an anchor point in a reality that shifts and flows like water. When everything else becomes uncertain, the cloth remains real, tangible, undeniably present. The figure by the fence is gone now, but its absence is more disturbing than its presence ever was. The space where it stood has become a wound in the landscape, a place where reality seems thinner, more permeable. Sometimes I catch glimpses of movement there, shadows that shouldn't exist, distortions that hurt to look at directly. I'm writing this now because I can feel something approaching. Not the figure that was just the beginning, the first sign of what was coming. Something larger, more fundamental, is stirring in the spaces between moments, in the gaps where my memory should be. The hum is getting stronger, more insistent, and I can feel it calling to something deep inside me, something that wants to answer. The metallic taste is permanent now, as much a part of me as my own saliva. My reflection continues to change, becoming more knowing, more satisfied, more wrong with each glance. The house has become a living thing, breathing around me, its walls pulsing with that familiar rhythm that matches the frequency in my bones. I keep returning to that moment with the cloth and the table, that first clear memory floating on the surface of everything else. It feels important, significant, like the key to understanding what's happened to me. But every time I try to examine it closely, it slips away, becomes something else, transforms into another fragment of the puzzle I can't solve. The writing continues without my conscious participation. Pages and pages of words in that perfect, terrible handwriting, describing events that might be memories or might be prophecies. I read them sometimes, trying to understand what part of me is creating them, but the meaning slips away even as I absorb it, leaving only the taste of metal and the sound of that endless, patient hum. Something is waking up inside me. Something that was always there but sleeping, waiting for the right frequency, the right combination of circumstances to rouse it from its dormancy. The cloth was the trigger, that simple act of cleaning dust from a table, but what followed was inevitable, programmed, as natural as breathing once the process began. I can feel it stirring now, stretching, preparing to fully emerge. The memories are coming back, not in fragments anymore, but in great waves that threaten to drown me in their intensity. And with them comes understanding, terrible and complete, of what I am, what I've always been, what I was made to become. The hum is so loud now it's become silence, so constant it's become the absence of sound. My reflection smiles back at me with my face, but not my expression. And I realize I'm no longer the one looking out through these eyes. Something else is here now, something that was always here, waiting for the right moment to step forward and claim what was always its own. I should stop writing, but the words keep coming, flowing through me like water through a broken dam. The cloth is still in my hand, still rough against my skin, still leaving those tiny fibers that cling like promises. And somewhere in the distance, I can hear footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate, coming home at last. Story 3. The late afternoon sun dipped through the window blinds, casting stripes of amber across the living room floor. The house carried the faint scent of lilies, mingling with the distant hum of traffic outside. As I shut the refrigerator door, a barely perceptible creaking caught my attention. The door frame to the study, always stubbornly shut, now hung ajar by a sliver. It seemed ordinary enough, yet a chill rippled through me, as if the air itself held its breath, waiting for something to reveal itself from the quiet shadows beyond. I tell myself that door opened on its own because of the settling foundation, but my hands shake as I reach for my coffee mug. The tremor has been constant for weeks now, a fine vibration that runs through my fingers like electricity seeking ground. Sleep comes in fragments, if at all. When I do drift off, I wake to find every electronic device in my home glowing softly in the darkness. The television displays static patterns that seem almost purposeful, geometric shapes that pulse and shift. My phone's screen shows no notifications, yet it remains illuminated, warm to the touch, as if something invisible is operating it from within. The neighbors avoid eye contact when I pass them on the street. I tried explaining to one of them about the sounds that begin just after midnight, the low thrumming that seems to emanate from beneath the ground itself, rising through the floorboards and settling into my bones. She nodded politely and hurried inside, her face carrying that particular expression people wear when they think you've lost your grip on reality. Perhaps I have. Perhaps that would be easier to accept than what I know to be true. 3 nights ago, I woke to find my bedroom filled with a pale blue luminescence. Not harsh like fluorescent lighting, but soft and organic, as if the air itself had become phosphorescent. The light seemed to breathe, growing brighter and dimmer in a rhythm that matched no earthly pulse. I lay perfectly still, afraid that any movement might shatter whatever delicate balance kept me safe in that moment. The light faded gradually, leaving behind the metallic taste of copper pennies on my tongue and a smell like ozone after lightning strikes. I've started keeping a journal, though the entries make little sense when I read them back. My handwriting appears different, more angular, as if my hand were being guided by someone else's muscle memory. The words describe sensations I don't remember experiencing, the feeling of floating several inches above my bed, conversations conducted without sound, the sensation of my thoughts being gently sifted through like sand through fingers. When I try to recall writing these entries, I find only blank spaces where memories should be. The breaking point came during what I now understand was the central event, though at the time it felt like emerging from a dream within a dream. I found myself standing in my backyard, barefoot on the cold grass, staring up at something that shouldn't have been there. A structure hung motionless in the air above the tree line, neither falling nor supported by any visible means. It possessed a geometry that hurt to look at directly, surfaces that seemed to fold in on themselves while simultaneously expanding outward. No sound emerged from it, yet I could feel its presence pressing against my consciousness like a hand testing the surface of still water. The thing remained there for what felt like hours, though when I finally looked away and then back, it had vanished completely. The only evidence of its presence was a perfect circle of grass beneath where it had hovered, each blade bent at precisely the same angle, pointing toward the center like the hands of a broken compass. I touched one of the grass blades and felt it vibrate under my fingertip, still resonating with some invisible frequency. Going back further, I can now recognize the signs I dismissed at the time. For weeks before that night, my routine had been subtly disrupted by small anomalies that seemed insignificant in isolation. The streetlight outside my bedroom window would extinguish itself at exactly the same time each evening, plunging that corner of the yard into absolute darkness. During these blackouts, I would sometimes glimpse movement in the shadows, shapes that moved with too much purpose to be random but too fluidly to be human. My electronic devices began behaving strangely during this period. The radio would tune itself to empty frequencies, filling the house with white noise that contained almost patterns, like voices speaking just below the threshold of comprehension. The microwave would activate on its own, running empty cycles that left the interior scorching hot and filled with the smell of burning metal. When I called repair services, the technicians found nothing wrong. The devices performed perfectly during their visits, leaving me to appear neurotic and unreliable. Time itself seemed to become unreliable during those weeks. I would sit down to read in the evening and suddenly find myself holding the same book hours later, with no memory of the intervening time. The pages would be turned to different chapters, sometimes with passages underlined in my own handwriting, though I couldn't recall reading them. The marked sentences always dealt with similar themes, descriptions of vast distances, the physics of light bending around massive objects, the way certain materials can become transparent under specific electromagnetic conditions. The physical symptoms began even earlier, so gradually that I attributed them to stress or changes in diet. A persistent metallic taste that no amount of brushing could eliminate. Nausea that would strike suddenly and fade just as quickly, always accompanied by the sensation that the ground beneath my feet was vibrating at a frequency just below human hearing. My vision would occasionally blur, not from fatigue, but as if I were looking through water, and during these episodes, ordinary objects would seem to shimmer and shift at their edges. I started experiencing what I can only describe as spatial disorientation. Rooms in my own home would feel larger or smaller than they should, with walls that seemed to breathe in and out like living tissue. Doorways would appear to be further away than they actually were, requiring more steps to reach than geometry should allow. The sensation was subtle but persistent, like living inside a house of mirrors where the distortions were almost too slight to notice. The earliest sign I can trace back to occurred on what had seemed like an ordinary evening. I was preparing dinner when I noticed that the shadows in my kitchen were falling in the wrong directions. The light from the overhead fixture should have cast shadows toward the corners, but instead they pooled in the center of the room, creating a dark circle on the floor that seemed deeper than any shadow had a right to be. When I moved through the space, my own shadow behaved normally, but the furniture and appliances cast their darkness toward that central point, as if responding to a light source that existed somewhere else entirely. That same evening, I found myself drawn to stand at my back door, looking out into the yard with an intensity I couldn't explain. The air outside seemed thicker than usual, almost viscous, and carried scents that didn't belong to my suburban neighborhood. Instead of the usual mixture of car exhaust and lawn chemicals, I detected something organic and unfamiliar, like the smell of deep ocean trenches or the interior of caves that have never known sunlight. The sensation lasted only minutes, but it left me with the unshakable feeling that something vast and patient had turned its attention toward my small corner of the world. Now, as I sit here trying to piece together this sequence of events, I realize that even my earliest memory of normalcy carries within it the seeds of what was to come. It was a calm afternoon, much like the one I'm experiencing now, with sunlight streaming through windows and the comforting sounds of everyday life continuing their familiar patterns. I was simply existing in my space, unaware that I had already been selected, already been marked by something that operates according to rules I cannot begin to comprehend. The coffee in my mug has grown cold while I've been remembering, and I notice that my reflection in its dark surface shows not my face, but a view of my kitchen ceiling, as if I were looking up from the bottom of a deep well. When I blink, the image returns to normal, but the wrongness of that moment settles into my chest like a stone. I understand now that what happened to me is not finished, that it was never meant to be a single event, but rather the beginning of a longer process that continues to unfold with each passing day. The door to my study remains open, and from where I sit, I can see that the shadows inside are moving independently of any light source, flowing like slow water across the floor and walls. I should be terrified, but instead I feel a strange calm, as if I'm finally approaching the completion of something that began long before I was aware of its existence. Whatever chose me that night is still here, still watching, still waiting for the next phase of its incomprehensible design to reveal itself through the ordinary moments that no longer feel ordinary at all. Story 4. The bicycle was discovered at 06:45, positioned precisely 3 feet from the curb. No indications of collision or force displacement were observed on its frame. The chain was intact and the brakes appeared recently adjusted. 2 snack wrappers lay on the ground nearby, weighted by minimal dew. Streetlights had cycled off, yet the adjacent window remained illuminated. No personal effects were found in the basket or on the pavement. The surrounding area showed no signs of congregation or departure, yet tire tracks deviated abruptly before the corner. I've read this report 17 times now. Each word feels familiar, like an echo of something I should remember. The bicycle they're describing belongs to me. I know this with absolute certainty, though I can't explain how. The handlebars, the slightly worn seat, the way the front wheel tilts just a degree to the left when parked. These details surface in my mind like fragments of a dream that refuses to fade completely. But I don't remember leaving it there. I don't remember much of anything from that period, actually. There's a gap in my memory, clean and precise, as if someone took scissors to a film strip and removed exactly what they needed to. The days before blur into the days after, leaving only this hollow space where something important should be. The feeling started 3 weeks ago. I woke up in my own bed, in my own room, everything exactly as it should be. But something was different, not wrong exactly, different, like returning to a house where someone has moved all the furniture 2 inches to the left. Everything appears normal until you walk into the coffee table that should be further away. I've been trying to piece it together since then. Small things mostly, notes I don't remember writing, a voice recording on my phone that I apparently made but have no memory of creating. Objects in my room that seem slightly out of place, though I can't pinpoint exactly how. The voice recording is where I decided to start. I found it buried in my phone's audio files, labeled simply as memo. The timestamp shows it was created during the gap in my memory. When I first played it, the sound quality was poor, filled with static that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. My voice comes through, but it sounds distant, as if I were speaking from the bottom of a well. Something's happening, my recorded voice says. The lights keep changing, not flickering, changing, like they're responding to something I can't see. There's a pause, and in the background I can hear what sounds like electronic interference. Not quite music, not quite noise. It shifts in frequency, rising and falling in patterns that almost make sense but never quite resolve into anything recognizable. I should probably go inside, my voice continues, but it sounds uncertain, like I'm not sure that's really what I want to do. But I can't stop watching. It's beautiful in a way that makes my teeth ache. The recording cuts off abruptly after that. I've listened to it dozens of times, trying to extract meaning from the static, from the tone of my own voice. Each time I notice something new, a sound that might be breathing that isn't mine, a subtle vibration that seems to come from the phone itself rather than the speakers. But it's the phrase about my teeth aching that triggers the first real fragment of memory. I'm standing on a sidewalk looking up. The streetlights are behaving strangely, pulsing in sequences that don't match their normal operation. But these aren't the warm yellow lights I'm used to. These are harsh and white, almost blue, casting everything in sharp relief. The shadows they create seem too dark, too deep, as if they're holes cut directly into the world. I remember the sensation in my mouth now. Not pain exactly, but a resonance, like when you accidentally bite down on aluminum foil. The lights pulse, and my molars respond with that same metallic ache. It's not unpleasant, just deeply strange, as if some part of my body is tuned to a frequency I didn't know existed. In the memory, I'm not alone on the street, but I can't see who else is there. I sense movement in my peripheral vision, but when I try to focus on it, there's nothing. Just the feeling of being observed, of being part of something larger that I don't understand. The memory fades as quickly as it came, leaving me with more questions than answers. I decided to retrace my steps to visit the location where my bicycle was found. The street looks ordinary in daylight, tree-lined and quiet, the kind of neighborhood where nothing unusual ever happens. But as I stand there trying to recreate that night, I notice things that seem off. The streetlight directly above where my bike was positioned has a different quality to its housing than the others. The metal looks newer, though not recently installed. More like it's been cleaned or polished in a way that removes the natural patina of weather and time. When I touch it, the surface feels oddly warm, though the sun hasn't been shining on it. I find myself running my fingers along the base of the pole, and that's when I discover something that shouldn't be there. A small indentation in the metal, perfectly circular, about the size of a quarter. It's too precise to be accidental damage, too intentional to beware. When I press my finger into it, I feel a subtle vibration, so faint I'm not sure if it's real or imagined. The moment I touch it, another fragment surfaces. I'm back on this street, but it's different. The air itself seems thicker, carrying a scent I can't identify. Something like new plastic mixed with the metallic smell you get when you cut yourself and taste blood. It's not unpleasant, but it's deeply unfamiliar, as if it belongs to a world that operates by different rules than ours. The lights are active again, but now I can see there are more of them than just the street lights. Points of illumination move through the air above me, following paths that seem random but feel deliberate. They pulse in response to each other, creating patterns that my eyes can follow but my brain can't process. Like trying to read a language that uses familiar letters arranged in impossible words. In this memory, I'm not standing still. I'm walking, following something or someone, though I can't see what. My footsteps echo strangely, as if the pavement is hollow beneath me. Every few steps, I pause and look back, but the street behind me appears empty. Yet the feeling of being followed, of being part of a procession I don't understand, never leaves. I remember reaching for my phone, wanting to document what I'm seeing. The screen lights up, but the display is wrong. Instead of my usual interface, there are symbols I don't recognize, geometric shapes that seem to shift when I'm not looking directly at them. I manage to start a recording anyway, speaking into the microphone while trying to make sense of what's happening around me. That's when I realize this memory connects to the audio file I found. I was there on this street, experiencing something that shouldn't have been possible. But even now, trying to hold on to the details, they slip away like water through my fingers. The fragment ends and I'm back in the present, standing next to the streetlight with my finger still pressed against that strange indentation. But something has changed. The vibration is stronger now, more noticeable. And when I look up at the light fixture, I could swear it pulses once, briefly, as if acknowledging my presence. I pull my hand away and step back, suddenly aware that I've been standing here for much longer than I intended. The sun has moved significantly across the sky, though I have no sense of lost moments. It's as if I blinked and several periods passed without my awareness. This time distortion becomes more frequent as I continue my investigation. I'll sit down to examine a piece of evidence, and when I next look up, the light in the room has changed in ways that suggest significant duration has passed. My phone shows the progression of minutes and periods, but I have no memory of experiencing them. It's during one of these lost intervals that I discover the notebook. I find it on my desk, open to a page covered in handwriting I recognize as mine, but I have no memory of writing these words, and the content is disturbing in ways I can't fully articulate. The entries appear to be observations, descriptions of phenomena that sound impossible but are recorded with scientific precision. The displacement occurs in stages, one entry reads. First, the familiar becomes unfamiliar. Then, the unfamiliar becomes invisible. Finally, the invisible becomes inevitable. Another entry, written in what appears to be a different session, states, "They don't communicate through sound or sight. The exchange happens in the spaces between thoughts, in the pause between heartbeats. You don't hear them speak. You simply know what they want you to know." The handwriting becomes less controlled as the entries progress, as if written under stress or in poor lighting conditions. Some words are barely legible, others are pressed so hard into the paper that they've torn through to the page beneath, but it's the final entry that disturbs me most. I understand now why I won't remember this. Memory is a luxury they can't afford to leave intact, but understanding and remembering are different things. I understand, and that understanding will remain buried beneath the forgetting, waiting to surface when the cycle begins again. Below this, in letters so faint they're almost invisible, someone has written, "It's starting again." The ink on these final words appears fresh. I don't remember writing any of this, but the notebook is definitely mine. I recognize the pen I used, the way I formed certain letters, even the coffee stain on the corner of the page from a mug I distinctly remember using. But these observations, these impossible descriptions, feel like they were written by someone else wearing my handwriting like a mask. As I read and reread these entries, the distortions in my present experience become more pronounced. Reflections in mirrors don't quite match my movements. Sounds occur with no apparent source. The air in my room sometimes carries that same strange scent I remembered from the street, that mixture of new plastic and something organic that I can't identify. It's during one of these episodes that the most vivid fragment surfaces. I'm no longer on the street, I'm somewhere else entirely, though the location defies easy description. The space around me is large but enclosed, like being inside a building that's bigger than its exterior should allow. The walls, if they can be called walls, seem to curve away from me in directions that hurt to contemplate. The lighting here doesn't come from any visible source. Instead, the air itself seems luminous, glowing with that same harsh white radiance I remember from the streetlights. But here, the light moves, flowing like liquid through the space, creating patterns that are beautiful and terrible in equal measure. I'm not alone in this place. There are others, though I can't see them clearly. They exist in my peripheral vision, shapes that suggest human form but with proportions that aren't quite right. When I try to look directly at them, they seem to fold in on themselves, becoming invisible without actually living. But I can hear them, not voices exactly, but something that bypasses my ears entirely and speaks directly to the part of my brain that processes language. They're discussing me, I realize, but not in any way I can understand. The concepts they exchange are too large, too complex for my mind to hold. I catch fragments, assessments, measurements, decisions being made about things I can't comprehend. One of them approaches me, and I feel rather than see its attention focus on me with uncomfortable intensity. There's no malice in this attention, but there's no recognition of my humanity either. I'm being examined the way a scientist might examine a specimen, with detached curiosity about my structure and function. The examination is thorough and completely non-physical. I feel my thoughts being cataloged, my memories being indexed and cross-referenced. Some are marked for retention, others for modification, still others for complete removal. The process is painless but deeply violating, like having someone rearrange the furniture in your mind without your permission. I try to resist, to hold on to the memories they're marking for deletion, but it's like trying to cup water in my hands. The harder I grasp, the more quickly it slips away. I can feel important moments dissolving, connections between events being severed, the continuity of my experience being edited in real moments. But something goes wrong with the process, or perhaps right, depending on your perspective. A small part of my awareness remains hidden, tucked away in some corner of my consciousness that they either can't find or don't think to look for. This fragment watches the editing process, taking notes, preparing for the moment when it can begin the work of reconstruction. The memory ends abruptly, leaving me gasping in my chair as if I've been holding my breath, but the sensation of being observed doesn't fade with the fragment. If anything, it becomes stronger. I have the distinct impression that something is watching me remember, monitoring my progress as I piece together what happened. I look around my room, searching for any sign of surveillance, but everything appears normal. Yet the feeling persists, a weight of attention that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It's not threatening exactly, but it's deeply unsettling, like realizing you're an actor in a play, but you've never seen the script. The final piece of evidence I discover is also the most disturbing. Hidden in a drawer I rarely use, wrapped in a cloth I don't recognize, I find an object that shouldn't exist. It's small, about the size of a smartphone, but its surface is unlike anything I've ever encountered. The material appears to be metallic, but it's warm to the touch and seems to pulse with its own internal rhythm. The surface is covered in patterns that shift when I'm not looking directly at them, geometric designs that suggest meaning without revealing it. When I hold the object, the vibration I felt at the streetlight returns, but stronger. It resonates through my bones, creating harmonics in my teeth and skull. The sensation is almost musical, as if the object is trying to communicate through frequency rather than form. As I examine it more closely, I notice that the patterns on its surface are responding to my touch. Where my fingers make contact, the designs become more complex, more active. It's as if the object is reading me while I'm trying to understand it, creating a feedback loop of mutual examination. The longer I hold it, the more the boundaries between memory and present experience begin to blur. I start to see overlays of that impossible space superimposed on my room. The walls seem to curve away from me, the ceiling stretches higher than it should, and the light takes on that flowing, liquid quality I remember from the fragment. But this isn't a memory. This is happening now, in real moments, as I sit in my chair holding this impossible object. The two realities exist simultaneously, neither more real than the other, both equally valid and equally impossible. I understand now that the investigation was never about recovering lost memories. It was about reaching this moment, this convergence where the experience I thought was over reveals itself to be ongoing. The gap in my memory wasn't an ending but an intermission, a pause between movements in a composition I'm only beginning to comprehend. The object in my hands pulses more rapidly now, and I can feel my awareness being drawn into its patterns. The room around me continues its impossible transformation, becoming the space I remember from the fragment, but also remaining stubbornly, undeniably my own familiar environment. I want to put the object down to step back from this convergence, but I find I can't. Not because I'm being compelled, but because I no longer want to. The fear I felt during the investigation is being replaced by something else. Not quite curiosity, not quite acceptance, but a recognition that this moment was always inevitable. The boundaries between observer and observed, between rememberer and remembered, dissolve completely. I am simultaneously the person investigating the mystery and the mystery being investigated. The fragments of memory I've been collecting weren't lost pieces of the past, but seeds of the present, planted and tended until they could bloom into this moment of convergence. The light in the room, both my room and that other space, begins to pulse in rhythm with the object in my hands. The sensation in my teeth returns, that metallic ache that connects me to frequencies I didn't know existed. But now I understand that the ache isn't a side effect of the experience. It's a tuning fork, a way of calibrating my awareness to perceive what's always been there, waiting just beyond the edge of normal perception. As the pulsing intensifies, I feel my consciousness expanding, stretching to accommodate concepts too large for my usual mental architecture. The understanding I glimpsed in the notebook entry begins to surface, not as memory, but as direct knowing. I comprehend, without being able to articulate, the nature of the cycle I'm part of, the reason for the careful editing of my memories, the purpose behind this elaborate process of forgetting and rediscovering. But even as understanding dawns, I can feel it beginning to slip away. The same mechanism that erased my memories before is activating again, preparing to fold this experience back into the hidden spaces of my mind. The investigation will end, the evidence will disappear or become meaningless, and I will return to my normal life with only a vague sense that something important has been forgotten. Yet this cycle isn't quite the same as the last one. The fragment of awareness that observed the editing process has grown stronger, more resilient. It will survive the forgetting, carrying with it not the details of what happened, but the knowledge that it happened, the certainty that the cycle exists. And that fragment will wait, patient and hidden, until the next convergence begins. Until I find myself once again standing in my room, holding evidence of an experience I can't quite remember, feeling the familiar weight of invisible observation, knowing without knowing why that something important has been forgotten. The object in my hands gives one final pulse, and I feel the convergence beginning to collapse back into ordinary reality. The walls resume their normal proportions, the light returns to its usual warm yellow glow, and the impossible space folds itself back into whatever dimension it usually occupies. But as the transformation completes, as I prepare to forget once again, a question surfaces in my mind with crystalline clarity. If the cycle is designed to make me forget, why do I always remember just enough to start investigating again? The object grows cold in my hands, and I know that by tomorrow I won't remember what it is or why I'm holding it. But the question will remain, buried beneath the forgetting, waiting to surface when the next investigation begins. Because there will be a next investigation, There always is. The cycle isn't ending, it's just beginning again. Story 5. The chime never sounded from the hall clock. My steps felt rehearsed as I moved down the passage, my hand brushing against walls that seemed to absorb the touch rather than push back. The cold tiles underfoot did not echo with the customary click of my shoes, wrapping my movement in an unnatural hush. Pausing by the door, I reached out, expecting the familiar weight of old wood, but it swayed gently, undemanding, as if refusing to acknowledge my intention. The air held a memory of motion, an unsettling reminder that lingered just out of sight. That's how it started or ended, I can't be sure anymore. I've been trying to piece together what happened to me, but the memories slip away like water through cupped hands. There's a gap in my mind, a hollow space where something significant should be. I know this because of how I feel different now. The way shadows seem to lean toward me when I'm not looking directly at them. The way my reflection sometimes takes a fraction too long to match my movements. I found something yesterday that made me realize I needed to start this investigation properly. It was tucked between the pages of a book I don't remember reading, a small digital recorder with a single file saved on it. The timestamp means nothing to me, but my voice is unmistakable, though it sounds distant, like I was speaking through water. I pressed play and heard myself whispering, "The walls are breathing. Can you see them breathing? The pattern keeps changing, but I can't look away. There's someone behind me, but when I turn around, there's only the space where they should be standing." I don't remember making that recording. The sound quality is strange, filled with a low-frequency hum that makes my teeth ache. Underneath my voice, there's something else, a rhythmic pulsing, like electronic heartbeats that don't quite sync with any natural rhythm. When I listen closely, I can almost make out other voices layered beneath mine, speaking words I can't quite understand. Playing it back triggers something. Not a complete memory, but fragments that surface like debris after a storm. I remember lights, not ordinary lights, but something that moved with intention, casting shadows that fell upward instead of down. They pulsed in sequences that felt almost like communication, though I couldn't decode their meaning. The illumination they cast made everything look slightly wrong, as if the world had been shifted 1 degree off its proper axis. There was a moment when I realized I wasn't alone, not because I saw anyone, but because the air itself felt occupied. You know that sensation when someone stands too close behind you, how your skin prickles with awareness. It was like that, but magnified, as if the presence extended beyond the boundaries of a single person. I was holding something in my hand, something small and warm that vibrated against my palm with irregular pulses. When I concentrate on that memory, my fingers still feel the phantom sensation of its texture, smooth like polished stone but yielding like living tissue. The recording cuts off abruptly, but not before I hear myself say something that chills me. They're showing me how to see properly now. The real shapes behind everything. I understand why they had to wait until now. I have no memory of understanding anything. Since finding that recording, other things have started surfacing. I discovered notes written in my handwriting scattered throughout my home. Cryptic phrases that mean nothing to me now. The frequency matches the pulse in my wrist. Mirror shows the room behind the room. Count the shadows, there are always more than there should be. One note written on the back of a receipt simply says, "Don't trust the version of yourself that remembers." That one makes my hands shake when I read it. I've been having episodes where reality seems to slip sideways. This morning I caught my reflection arranging its face differently than mine, smoothing its expression back to match mine only when it noticed me watching. The bathroom mirror now shows a room that's almost identical to mine, but the angles are wrong and there's always someone moving just outside the frame. The sounds have started again too, that same electronic pulsing from the recording, but now I hear it when I'm fully awake, usually in the spaces between other sounds. It's strongest in the late afternoon when the light begins to fade and shadows grow longer. I found a photograph today that I don't remember taking. It shows a view from my window, but the landscape outside is different. Instead of the familiar street, there's an endless corridor stretching into darkness, lined with doors that stand slightly ajar. In the foreground, barely visible, is the reflection of someone standing behind the camera, someone who isn't me. The person in the reflection is wearing my clothes, has my general build, but their face is turned away, looking at something outside the frame. Their posture suggests they're listening to something I can't hear. Another fragment surfaces as I study the photograph. I remember standing at that window but not looking out. I was looking at the glass itself, watching as patterns formed in the condensation without any breath to create them. The patterns looked almost like writing, symbols that rearranged themselves whenever I tried to focus on them directly. There was music playing, but not from any device I could identify. It seemed to come from the walls themselves, a melody that was almost familiar but wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. The notes bent in directions that shouldn't exist, creating harmonies that made my vision blur. I remember reaching out to touch the glass and my hand passing through it as if it were made of cold water. The sensation was neither warm nor cold, but something else entirely, something my nervous system didn't have words for. On the other side of the window, in that impossible corridor, something was walking toward me. Not walking exactly, but moving with purpose, its form shifting between shapes that my eyes couldn't quite process. It moved like liquid mercury trying to hold a human form, never quite succeeding but never completely failing either. The closer it came, the more I understood that it was coming for me specifically. Not with malicious intent, but with the inevitability of gravity or time. It had always been coming for me, and this moment was simply when our paths finally intersected. I think I spoke to it. I have a vague memory of words leaving my mouth, though I can't recall what I said or even what language I used. The thing paused in its approach, tilting what might have been its head, and then responded in a voice that sounded like static learning to speak. The conversation lasted forever and no time at all. We discussed things that I can't now remember, concepts that my normal waking mind isn't equipped to retain. But I know the discussion was important, possibly the most important conversation I've ever had. When it ended, the thing that might have been speaking reached out with something that might have been a hand and touched something that might have been my forehead. The contact felt like cold electricity, like being struck by lightning made of ice water. That's when everything went white. I'm writing this now because the episodes are getting stronger. The electronic pulsing is constant now, and I've started to notice that other people can't hear it. I tested this by asking about the strange humming sound while standing next to someone, and they looked at me with the particular kind of concern reserved for people who are losing their grip on reality. But I'm not losing my grip, I'm remembering. The thing I held in my hand during that encounter, I found it again. It was in my pocket, though I don't remember putting it there. It's exactly as I remembered, smooth, warm, pulsing with that irregular rhythm. When I hold it now, the memories come more clearly, but they bring something else with them. I'm starting to see the spaces between things, the gaps in reality where something else shows through. The walls of my home are becoming transparent, revealing the vast network of corridors that exists behind everything. I can see other people moving through those passages, people who look almost human but carry themselves with that same liquid uncertainty I remember from my visitor. They're preparing something. I can sense their anticipation, their careful arrangement of circumstances. They move with purpose, adjusting things I can't see, making modifications to the world that only become apparent in retrospect. I think they're preparing for others to have the same experience I had, the same conversation, the same moment of understanding, the same white flash that separates before from after. The object in my hand pulses faster now, matching the rhythm of my heart, or maybe my heart is matching its rhythm. The distinction seems less important than it used to. I can see my reflection more clearly now, and I understand why it sometimes moves differently than I do. It's not my reflection anymore. It's the version of me that exists in those corridors, the version that never came back from that conversation by the window. That version is trying to tell me something, mouthing words I can't quite read. Its eyes are wider than mine, as if it's seen something that expanded them permanently. Its mouth moves with urgent precision, repeating the same message over and over. I think it's trying to warn me, but I can't tell if the warning is about something that's going to happen, or something that's already happened and is still happening. The electronic pulsing has changed. It's not just sound anymore, it's becoming something I can see, waves of distortion that ripple through the air like heat mirages. They're coming from everywhere now, from the walls, from the spaces between objects, from the gaps in my own thoughts. I understand now why I made that first recording. It wasn't for me to find later. It was for whoever comes after me, whoever finds themselves in this same position of trying to reconstruct something that was deliberately obscured. The thing in my hand is getting warmer. The pulsing is so rapid now it feels almost like vibration. I can feel it changing, becoming something else, something that will serve a different purpose than it did before. My reflection has stopped trying to warn me. Instead, it's smiling, and that smile is spreading to parts of its face where smiles shouldn't be able to reach. It's becoming something that uses my face as a starting point, but isn't limited by the usual constraints of human expression. I think the conversation isn't over. I think it never ended, and what I've been experiencing is just the echo of something much larger, much longer, much more complex than I initially understood. The corridors behind everything are becoming more visible now. I can see them even when I'm not looking in mirrors or through windows. They overlay everything, a vast network of passages that connect all the spaces where reality wears thin. There are others in those corridors now. Not just the liquid figures I saw before, but people like me, people who had their own conversations, their own moments of white light, their own periods of confused reconstruction. They're all holding objects like mine. They're all moving with the same purposeful uncertainty I feel. They're all approaching something, converging on a point I can't yet see but can sense waiting ahead. I think I'm supposed to join them soon. The object in my hand is pulling me forward now, not just pulsing but actively tugging, like a compass needle seeking its true north. But before I go, I need to leave this record. For whoever finds it, for whoever starts their own investigation into their own missing memories, for whoever discovers their own electronic recording full of impossible claims. The conversation never ends. It just expands to include more voices, more perspectives, more ways of understanding what lies behind the familiar world. I can see the place where I'm supposed to go now. It's through the window that isn't really a window, down the corridor that exists behind my wall, past the figures who are no longer trying to look human. My reflection waves goodbye, but its hand keeps waving even after I've stopped looking at it. The object in my palm has stopped pulsing. It's perfectly still now, perfectly warm, perfectly ready for whatever comes next. I can hear new voices in the electronic static. They're welcoming me back, asking if I'm ready to continue the conversation we started before I forgot how to remember. I think I am ready. But I wonder who will find this account, who will start their own investigation into their own missing pieces, who will discover that their reflection moves just slightly out of sync, that shadows fall in directions that don't match their light sources, that the air sometimes carries the scent of new plastic and cold blood. And when they do, will they understand that this isn't an ending, but an invitation? The chime still hasn't sounded from the hall clock. I don't think it ever will, Story 6. The latch clicked smoothly as I turned the key, a familiar resistance now absent. The metallic echo dulled in the hallway, too soft, yet it left a peculiar imprint on my ears. My hand lingered on the doorknob, feeling the cool brass pulse under my fingertips as if attuned to a quiet rhythm. The air seemed unchanged, yet my skin sensed a shift, a subtle pressure like the descent of an unseen weight. As I stepped forward, the scent of fresh paint lingered, stark against the memory of old wood and neglect. But that wasn't the only thing that had changed. Suddenly, the silence seemed to vibrate, and the walls themselves felt like they were listening. I'm trying to remember what happened after that moment. The memories come in pieces, like photographs scattered on a floor, some face down, others torn at the edges. I know something changed that day, but the sequence feels wrong, broken. My mind keeps circling back to that doorknob, the way it felt alive under my palm. There was a hum. I remember the hum now. It wasn't coming from the walls or the pipes or any mechanical thing I could name. It was deeper, like it was rising from beneath the floorboards or maybe from inside my own chest. The frequency made my teeth ache. I can still feel it sometimes when I'm trying to sleep. That low vibration that seems to sync with my heartbeat until I can't tell which is which. The paint smell was wrong too. Fresh paint should smell sharp, chemical. This was different, sweeter, like copper pennies left in warm milk. I kept breathing it in, trying to place it, and each breath made my vision swim slightly at the edges. The walls looked different in that light, smoother somehow, as if they'd been polished from the inside. I remember standing in the living room, but the furniture wasn't where I'd left it. The couch faced the wrong direction. The coffee table sat at an angle that made no sense. Everything looked staged, like a room in a catalog where nothing quite belongs to anyone. But that might have been later or before. The timeline keeps shifting when I try to pin it down. There was someone in the kitchen. I think there was someone in the kitchen. I could hear the soft scrape of a chair against linoleum, the whisper of fabric against fabric. But when I called out, the sound stopped so abruptly it felt like the house was holding its breath. I waited for a response that never came, and the silence stretched until it became its own kind of noise. My reflection in the hallway mirror looked tired, more tired than I felt, with shadows under my eyes that seemed too dark for the lighting. I touched my face and watched my reflection do the same, but there was a delay, just a fraction of a second, like looking at myself through water. I kept staring, waiting for the delay to happen again, but mirrors don't lie twice in the same way. The basement door was open. I know I always kept it closed, the old wood warped enough that you had to really pull to get it shut properly. But there it was, hanging open just wide enough to let the cool air drift up from below. The air smelled like earth and something else, something that made my mouth water in a way that felt wrong. I stood at the top of the stairs, listening to the silence below, and I swear I could hear breathing that wasn't mine. I remember the phone ringing, but when I picked it up, there was only that same low hum, transmitted through the receiver and directly into my ear. It felt intimate, invasive, like someone whispering secrets in a language I almost understood. I held the phone away from my ear, but I could still hear it, still feel it resonating in my skull. When I hung up, my hand was shaking. The windows were clean, cleaner than I'd ever seen them, so transparent they barely seemed to exist. I could see through to the yard with perfect clarity, every blade of grass distinct, every shadow sharp-edged. But the view was wrong somehow. The tree was there, but fuller. The fence looked newer. Even the sky seemed a shade off, like someone had adjusted the color just enough to make it unsettling. There was a photograph on the mantel that I didn't recognize. It showed a room that looked like my living room, but the angles were wrong, the proportions shifted. In the photo, someone sat in my chair, but their face was turned away, obscured by shadow. I picked up the frame, and the glass was warm to the touch, as if it had been sitting in sunlight, though the room was dim. I keep coming back to the feeling of being watched, not from outside, but from within the house itself, as if the walls had developed eyes I couldn't see. Every time I moved from room to room, I felt like I was being tracked, catalogued, studied. The sensation was strongest in the hallway, where the fresh paint smell lingered and the air felt thick enough to swim through. The water from the kitchen faucet tasted metallic. I let it run, thinking it might clear, but the taste only intensified. When I cupped my hands under the stream, the water felt warmer than it should, almost body temperature. I looked down at my reflection in the surface and saw my face wavering, distorted, like I was looking up at myself from the bottom of a well. There was music playing somewhere, not from a radio or stereo, but filtering through the walls themselves, muffled and distant. A melody I almost recognized, played on instruments I couldn't identify. The tune was simple, repetitive, the kind that gets stuck in your head and plays on loop until you want to scream. But when I tried to follow the sound to its source, it seemed to move, always coming from the room I'd just left. I found myself in the bedroom, though I don't remember walking there. The bed was made with corners so sharp they could cut paper, hospital perfect in a way I'd never managed. The pillows were fluffed and positioned just so, as if waiting for someone who would never arrive. I sat on the edge and felt the mattress respond differently, firmer, like it had been replaced with something that only resembled a bed. The closet door was cracked open, and I could see my clothes hanging inside, but they looked different, cleaner, newer, as if they'd been washed and pressed by hands more careful than mine. I reached for a shirt and felt the fabric, smooth and slightly warm, like it had just come off someone else's body. The scent was wrong too, not my detergent, not my fabric softener, but something floral and cloying that made my stomach turn. I think I fell asleep, or something like sleep. I remember lying down and closing my eyes, but my mind stayed active, alert, processing sounds and sensations that shouldn't exist in an empty house. Footsteps in the hallway, soft and measured. The creak of floorboards under weight that wasn't mine. The whisper of curtains moving in rooms where no windows were open. When I opened my eyes, the light had changed. Not darker or brighter, but different somehow, as if it was coming from a different sun. The shadows fell at impossible angles, and everything looked slightly overexposed, like a photograph taken with too much flash. I sat up and felt dizzy, disoriented, like I'd been spinning in place for hours. The hum was stronger now, pulsing in rhythm with something I couldn't identify. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, the walls, the floor, the air itself vibrating with that low, persistent frequency. I pressed my hands to my ears, but it didn't help. The sound was inside me now, part of me, like it had always been there, and I was just now learning to hear it. I walked through the house again, room by room, trying to catalog what was different, what was wrong. But the wrongness was subtle, pervasive, like trying to identify what's off about a face you know well but can't quite place. Everything looked like it should, but nothing felt like it belonged. The front door was locked. I tried the handle, turned it both ways, but it wouldn't budge. The key that had opened it so easily before now refused to turn, as if the lock had changed its mind about letting me leave. I pulled and twisted, but the door remained sealed, solid, immovable as stone. I remember standing in the center of the living room, turning slowly, taking in every detail. The furniture, the walls, the way the light fell across the floor. It all looked right, but it felt like a stage set, a careful recreation of my life built by someone who had studied me from a distance. Close enough to get the details right, but not close enough to understand what made it home. The phone rang again. This time I didn't answer, but I could hear it through the walls, that same low hum transmitted through copper wires and into the house's nervous system. The sound seemed to sync with my heartbeat, and I wondered if that was intentional, if someone was listening to me as carefully as I was listening to them. I think that's when I understood, not consciously, not in words, but in the deep animal part of my brain that recognizes predators and knows when to run. Something had been watching me, studying me, learning the patterns of my life with the patience of something that doesn't experience time the way I do. And now it was trying those patterns on, wearing my life like a costume that almost fit. The basement door was still open. I approached it again, drawn by the cool air and that earthy smell that made my mouth water. This time I could hear something down there, a soft rustling like papers being shuffled or fabric being folded and refolded. I put my foot on the first step and felt it give slightly, as if the wood was softer than it should be. I didn't go down. Some instinct held me back, kept me at the threshold between the known and the unknown. But I listened, straining to identify the sounds below. They were rhythmic, purposeful, like someone working at a task that required great care and attention. I called out, but my voice seemed to be absorbed by the darkness, swallowed before it could reach whatever was waiting below. The mirror in the hallway reflected a room I didn't recognize. Same furniture, same layout, but the proportions were wrong, stretched and distorted like a funhouse reflection. I stood in front of it, watching myself watch myself, and noticed that my reflection's eyes seemed to focus on something just over my shoulder, something I couldn't see when I turned around. I remember the taste of copper becoming stronger, coating my tongue and the back of my throat. Every breath brought more of it, until I felt like I was drowning in the metallic flavor. I tried to rinse my mouth, but the water from the faucet only made it worse, adding its own strange warmth to the mix. The house was changing around me, not dramatically, not in ways I could point to and say, that's different, but in small, subtle shifts that accumulated like sediment, building up until the familiar became foreign. A wall that seemed taller than before, a doorway that felt narrower, corners that were somehow sharper, more defined, as if reality itself was being adjusted by careful, invisible hands. I found myself back at the front door, key in hand, trying again to turn the lock, but my hand was shaking now, and the key felt different, heavier, like it was made of something denser than brass. The metal was warm, almost hot, and it seemed to pulse with its own rhythm, separate from mine but trying to sync up. The silence was complete now. No hum, no rustling from the basement, no phantom music filtering through the walls, just the absence of sound so profound it felt like pressure against my eardrums. I could hear my own heartbeat, my own breathing, magnified and echoing in the stillness until I sounded like a stranger to myself. I think I'm starting to remember now. Not everything, not clearly, but enough to know that what happened in that house wasn't natural, wasn't normal, wasn't something that should happen to anyone. The memories are coming back in pieces, and each piece brings with it a sensation I can't quite describe, like recognition mixed with revulsion. Something was wearing my life. Something had been watching, learning, preparing to step into the space I occupied and make it its own. The fresh paint, the clean windows, the perfectly made bed, they were all part of the preparation, the careful staging of a life it was about to inhabit. But I got away, somehow I got away, though I can't remember how, can't recall the moment of escape or the journey that brought me here, wherever here is. All I know is that I'm not in that house anymore, not trapped behind that locked door with something that knew me better than I knew myself. The memories are getting stronger now, clearer, more insistent. I can feel them pressing against the inside of my skull, demanding to be acknowledged, to be understood, and with them comes the certainty that whatever I escaped from isn't finished with me yet. I can taste copper again. I can hear that low hum starting up, faint but growing stronger. And somewhere in a house that looks exactly like the one I used to call home, something is still waiting, still watching, still learning. The latch is clicking again, story 7. The morning fog clung to the windows, muting the world outside as I sat at the table. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the faint scent of rain, creating a comforting cocoon. Across the room, the grandfather clock stood silent, its hands frozen at midnight. Despite its stillness, a gentle chime echoed through the air, a sound that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere all at once. I strained to listen, but the muted melody slipped between the walls, a haunting refrain that shouldn't exist. The clock remained unmoving, but the chime continued, a ghostly echo whispering of something unseen, something unsettled. I suppose it started with the light. In the first dream, there was just this oval glow hovering above me, pulsing like a slow breath. I remember thinking it was odd how still it remained, how perfectly centered over my bed. The light had this quality to it, not warm like a lamp, not harsh like fluorescent bulbs, just there, present, watching. The dream felt ordinary otherwise. I was lying in my bedroom, the same cream-colored walls, the same crack running along the ceiling near the window. Everything exactly as it should be except for that light. When I woke, I dismissed it as stress. Work had been demanding lately, and my mind was probably just processing the day's tensions through some strange visual metaphor. But the light returned. The second dream lasted longer, unfolding like a slow-motion film reel. The oval glow was still there, but now it moved, not quickly, not dramatically. Just a gentle drift from left to right, then back again, as if it were scanning, searching. In this dream there was a sound, a constant hum, like someone was modulating a frequency only I could hear. It started low, almost below perception, then gradually rose until it filled the space between my ears. The sound had texture to it, metallic and clean, but with something underneath that felt almost organic, almost alive. I tried to sit up in the dream, but my body wouldn't respond. Not paralyzed exactly, more like I was suspended in something thick and invisible. I felt as if I were being lifted, though no part of my body moved. The sensation was gentle, almost nurturing, but wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. The voice came near the end of that second dream, distant and muffled like someone speaking through water. I couldn't make out the words, but the cadence was deliberate, measured. It wasn't speaking to me, I realized. It was speaking about me. When I woke from that dream, my sheets were damp with sweat, and there was a sharp scent in the air, like ozone after a storm, but cleaner, more artificial. I opened the windows to air out the room, but the smell lingered for hours. That's when I started noticing things. Small things at first. My coffee mug was on the wrong side of the sink when I came down for breakfast. I always placed it on the right, but there it was on the left. The book I'd been reading was open to a page I didn't remember reaching. My car keys were in my jacket pocket instead of on the hook by the door. These details felt pulled from somewhere else, like fragments of someone else's routine had somehow mixed with mine. I told myself I was simply more tired than usual, that my attention was scattered. But deep down, something was stirring, a recognition I couldn't quite grasp. The third dream changed everything. This time the oval light wasn't alone. There were others, smaller and dimmer, arranged in a pattern I couldn't quite comprehend. They moved in coordination, like a slow dance performed by beings made of pure illumination. The humming sound had evolved too, becoming more complex, layered with harmonics that seemed to resonate in my bones. But it was the clarity that disturbed me most. This dream felt more vivid than my waking life, more real than the world I inhabited during daylight hours. Colors were more saturated, sounds more precise, sensations more immediate. I could feel the texture of the air against my skin, could taste the metallic atmosphere on my tongue. The voice was clearer now, though still not quite audible. It spoke in measured tones, sometimes pausing as if waiting for a response I couldn't give. There were other sounds too, soft mechanical whirs and clicks, like delicate instruments being adjusted. In this dream, I became aware of being observed, not just by the lights, but by something beyond them, something patient and methodical. I felt exposed, studied, catalogued, yet there was no malice in the attention, no threat, just an overwhelming sense of purpose I couldn't understand. When I tried to wake from this dream, I couldn't. The usual methods, pinching myself, trying to move my fingers, calling out, none of them worked. I was held in place by the dream's gravity, unable to surface. The oval light pulsed brighter, and I felt myself sinking deeper into whatever reality this was. I woke suddenly, violently, my heart hammering against my ribs, but something was wrong. The room looked different, though I couldn't pinpoint how. The shadows fell at strange angles, and the air felt thicker, more resistant. When I reached for the bedside lamp, my hand encountered something else first, something small and smooth and warm. I turned on the light and found a small metallic object on my nightstand, perfectly round, about the size of a coin, but seamlessly smooth with no markings or edges. It seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating a small void in the illuminated space around it. I had never seen this object before, I was certain of that, yet holding it felt familiar, like retrieving something I had temporarily misplaced. The contamination began then. During the day, I would hear the humming sound in moments of silence. Sitting in my office, the frequency would emerge from beneath the ambient noise of air conditioning and distant traffic. In the shower, between the sounds of water and steam, that metallic resonance would surface just at the edge of perception. I started seeing lights that weren't there, oval glows reflected in windows, caught in peripheral vision, gone when I turned to look directly. My colleagues didn't seem to notice them, didn't react when I paused mid-conversation to track a moving illumination across the conference room wall. My sense of passing moments became unreliable. I would sit down to check emails and discover hours had elapsed without my awareness. Conversations felt like they were happening to someone else, my responses automatic and distant. I was present but not present, engaged but disconnected. The sharp, clean scent began appearing in my waking life too. In my car during the morning commute, in the grocery store between the produce and dairy sections, in my living room while watching television. Always brief, always surprising, always accompanied by a moment of profound disorientation. I started finding small wounds on my body, tiny punctures on my arms, perfectly round and painless. They appeared overnight, healing quickly, leaving only the faintest marks. When I examined them closely, they seemed too precise to be accidental, too clean to be natural. The dreams continued, but now they felt less like dreams and more like appointments. I would lie down each night with a sense of expectation, almost anticipation. The oval light would be waiting, patient and familiar. The humming would welcome me back like an old friend. In these recurring visions, I began to understand that I was part of something larger, not threatened or harmed, but included, selected. The lights weren't studying me, they were updating me. The voice wasn't speaking about me, it was speaking with me, though I couldn't yet understand the language. The mechanical sounds became more distinct, more purposeful. I could identify individual instruments, could track their movements around me. Sometimes I felt gentle pressure on my arms, my forehead, my chest. Never painful, always careful, like a medical examination performed by beings who understood my fragility. I started to suspect these weren't dreams at all. The realization came gradually, like a photograph developing in slow motion. The details were too consistent, too connected to my waking life. The objects that appeared in my home, the wounds on my body, the scents and sounds that followed me through my days, they were all evidence of something real. Something that was happening to me, not something I was imagining. But if they weren't dreams, what were they, and why couldn't I remember them clearly? The experiences felt simultaneously vivid and distant, immediate and forgotten. Like memories that had been carefully edited, important details preserved while the context was gently erased. I began to research, though I wasn't sure what I was looking for, stories of others who had experienced similar things, scientific explanations for the phenomena I was observing, rational frameworks that could contain what was happening to me. But every explanation felt inadequate, every rational interpretation missed something essential. The experience was too nuanced, too carefully orchestrated to be random, too purposeful to be meaningless. The dreams, or whatever they were, began to feel like a conversation I was slowly learning to understand. The lights moved in response to my thoughts. The humming adjusted to my emotional state. The voice became more patient when I was confused, more animated when I was receptive. I was being prepared for something, though I couldn't grasp what. Each encounter built upon the previous one, adding layers of familiarity and comfort. What had initially felt alien was becoming natural, expected, even welcomed. The boundary between sleeping and waking dissolved entirely. I would find myself in the oval light's presence during what I thought were normal afternoons, only to discover later that hours had passed without my awareness. The humming sound became a constant companion, so integrated into my perception that silence felt incomplete without it. My reflection began to look different, not dramatically but subtly. My eyes seemed deeper, more aware. My movements became more deliberate, more purposeful. I felt like I was becoming a more refined version of myself, though I couldn't explain what was being refined or by whom. The metallic objects multiplied. I found them in my pockets, on my desk, nestled between the couch cushions, each one identical, perfectly smooth, warm to the touch. I collected them without conscious decision, drawn to their presence like a magnet to metal. Then came the night when everything changed. I lay down expecting the familiar routine, the gentle transition from waking consciousness to whatever state these encounters required. The oval light appeared as always, pulsing with its slow, steady rhythm. The humming filled the space around me, welcoming and familiar. But this time I remained fully aware, completely present. I could feel my body on the bed, could sense the room around me, while simultaneously experiencing the light and sound and presence that had become so familiar. The two realities existed simultaneously, overlapping and interweaving like double-exposed photographs. The voice spoke clearly now, though not in words I recognized, yet I understood it was thanking me, acknowledging my cooperation, my adaptation, my willingness to participate in something beyond my comprehension. I felt a profound sense of completion, as if a long process was reaching its conclusion. The lights moved in a final pattern, complex and beautiful, while the mechanical sounds performed what felt like a closing ceremony. The gentle pressure on my body was more pronounced now, more intentional, like a farewell embrace from beings I had learned to trust. When it ended, I expected to wake as I always did, but I didn't wake because I had never been asleep. I sat up in bed, fully conscious, fully present, and reached for the bedside lamp. My hand encountered the familiar smooth warmth of another metallic object, but this one was different, larger, more complex, with surfaces that shifted and changed under my touch. As I held it, the object began to emit its own light, a soft, oval glow that pulsed with the same rhythm I had grown to recognize. The humming sound emerged from it, gentle and welcoming, filling my bedroom with the frequency that had become as natural as my own heartbeat. I understood then that I was no longer just experiencing these encounters. I had become part of them. The dreams had been preparation, the gradual integration of something extraordinary into my ordinary life. And now, holding this impossible object that glowed with its own inner light, I realized that the process was complete. The morning fog still clings to the windows as I sit here now, the coffee growing cold in my cup. The grandfather clock remains frozen at midnight, but the chimes continue their ghostly echo. And in my hand, warm and pulsing with gentle light, lies proof that some dreams are more real than the world we think we know. The oval glow reflects in the foggy glass, and I can hear the humming beginning again, calling me back to a place that exists between sleeping and waking, between possible and impossible, between the life I thought I was living and the one I'm only now beginning to understand. Story 8. The door didn't swing closed behind me. I nudged it again, half expecting the familiar thunk of wood against frame, but only air moved. My footsteps echoed on the tile floor, yet the walls swallowed the sound before it reached my ears. I drifted through the hallway, feeling the fabric of the drapes brush my arm with an unusual stillness. The light switch under my fingers clicked, but the room remained dim, shadows refusing to retreat. As I reached for the kitchen drawer, its silent glide unnerved me, smooth like a whispered secret. I hesitated, my fingers brushing the counter, where a thin layer of dust felt strategically absent. I know now that this is how it ends, this weightless existence, this half-presence in a world that no longer quite acknowledges me. The house responds to my touch but doesn't truly feel it. I move through rooms that remember my shape but have forgotten my substance. There's no going back from this threshold I've crossed, no undoing what I've become. But if I concentrate, if I let my mind drift backward like smoke reversing its path, I can trace the moments that led me here. The realization came to me while standing in the bathroom, watching steam rise from the faucet I hadn't turned on. The mirror showed my reflection, but it lagged behind my movements by just a fraction of a second, like an old television with poor reception. That's when I understood what the woman had meant when she pressed that smooth stone into my palm and whispered about doors that only open one way. The steam spelled out words I couldn't read, letters that dissolved before I could make sense of them. My reflection mouthed something different than what I was saying, and I knew with crystalline certainty that I had already passed the point of no return. Before that moment of terrible clarity, I remember sitting in the basement, surrounded by boxes I didn't remember packing. The concrete walls seemed to pulse with a rhythm that matched my heartbeat, but slower, more deliberate. In my hands was a photograph of myself standing in this very basement, except in the picture, the boxes were already there, covered in dust that would take years to accumulate. I was wearing the same clothes I had on at that moment, making the same confused expression I could feel on my face. The timestamp on the back was written in handwriting I recognized as my own, but I had never owned a camera that printed dates. The photograph had been tucked inside a book I found on the kitchen table, a book with pages that felt warm to the touch. The words on those pages rearranged themselves as I read, telling a story about someone who looked exactly like me making choices I was about to make. Each page I turned revealed events that hadn't happened yet but felt like memories. The book described my walk through the basement, my discovery of the boxes, even my confusion about the photograph. It was written in present tense but felt like a recollection, as if someone was remembering my future. I had been drawn to the kitchen by a sound that wasn't quite music and wasn't quite voices. It drifted up through the floorboards, a melody that seemed to know my name without ever saying it. The book was lying open on the table, though I was certain the surface had been clear when I walked through earlier. The pages fluttered without any breeze, and the warm sensation emanated from the binding like a small, living thing. As I picked it up, the sound from below grew louder, more insistent, and I realized it was coming from the basement I had been avoiding for weeks. Those weeks blur together now, but I remember the gradual changes. Doors that used to stick began opening too easily. The refrigerator hummed in harmonies instead of its usual monotone drone. Shadows fell at angles that didn't match the position of the sun. I started finding things in places I hadn't put them. My coffee mug in the bedroom, my keys in the freezer, my reflection in windows that faced the wrong direction. The house was preparing for something, rearranging itself around an event I couldn't yet see coming. The changes started after my conversation with the woman at the market. She had been standing by the produce, running her fingers over fruit that looked perfect but felt hollow when touched. Her eyes were the color of old pennies, and when she looked at me, I felt like she was reading text written on my bones. She asked if I had been hearing the music yet, and before I could answer, she pressed something small and smooth into my palm. When I looked down, it was gone, but my hand felt heavier, as if it was remembering the weight of something important. I had gone to the market because my usual grocery store felt wrong that morning. The aisles stretched longer than they should have, and the fluorescent lights cast shadows that moved independently of the people walking beneath them. Other customers spoke in whispers that sounded like static, and their shopping carts left no tracks on the freshly mopped floor. The checkout clerk's name tag was blank, and when she handed me my receipt, the paper crumbled to dust before I could read it. That's when I decided to try the smaller market across town, the one I had never noticed before despite driving past that corner hundreds of times. The drive there took longer than it should have, even though I hit every green light. The radio played songs I remembered from childhood, but with lyrics that had changed in subtle, unsettling ways. Familiar melodies carried words about doors and thresholds and the weight of stones that weren't there. The GPS on my phone showed me traveling in a straight line, but I could feel the car turning corners that didn't exist on any map. When I finally arrived, I sat in the parking lot for several minutes, watching other shoppers emerge from the store carrying bags that seemed too light for their contents. I had decided to leave the house that morning because the silence had become too loud. Every room hummed with an absence of sound that pressed against my eardrums like deep water. The walls breathed in rhythms that didn't match my own, and the floors creaked under footsteps I wasn't taking. I needed groceries, but more than that, I needed to be around other people, to confirm that the world outside still operated according to rules I understood. As I locked the front door behind me, I noticed that my key turned the wrong direction, but the lock clicked anyway. The night before, I had dreamed of standing in my kitchen, holding a book that felt warm and alive. In the dream, I was reading about someone who looked exactly like me, someone who was about to make a series of choices that would change everything. When I woke, the taste of copper filled my mouth, and my palm ached as if I had been gripping something small and heavy all night. The sheets were damp with sweat that smelled like basement air and old photographs. I stumbled to the kitchen for water, and for just a moment, I could have sworn I saw a book lying open on the table before my eyes fully adjusted to the darkness. But even before that dream, something had shifted. It started with the basement door, which I found standing open one morning despite being certain I had never unlocked it. The air that drifted up from below carried scents of dust and time and something else, something that reminded me of the way stones smell after rain. I closed the door and turned the lock, but throughout that entire morning I could hear sounds from below, the whisper of pages turning, the soft thud of boxes being moved, the quiet footsteps of someone who walked exactly like me. The basement had been sealed when I first moved into the house. The previous owner, a man with nervous hands and eyes that wouldn't meet mine, had mentioned something about water damage and recommended I never go down there. He gave me a key but suggested I throw it away, said some spaces were better left undisturbed. I'd kept the key anyway, hanging it on a hook by the back door where I could see it but never felt compelled to use it. Until that morning when I found the door open and realized the key was no longer on its hook. I remember the day I moved in, how the house had felt like it was holding its breath. The rooms were clean but somehow expectant, as if they had been waiting for someone specific to fill them. The basement door had a different kind of lock than the others, something old and heavy that looked like it belonged on a chest rather than a door. When I asked the previous owner about it, he had pressed the key into my hand with fingers that trembled slightly and said something about choices that echo backward through time. But the very beginning, the moment that set everything in motion, was smaller than I expected. I was standing in the kitchen of my new house, running my hand along the counter to feel for dust or grime the cleaners might have missed. My fingers found a small indentation in the surface, perfectly round and smooth, as if something had rested there for years, wearing away the material grain by grain. The shape felt familiar under my fingertips, though I had never seen it before. As I traced its outline, I heard the first whisper of music from somewhere below, and my palm began to ache with the phantom weight of something I had not yet lost. Story 9. I was fixed on the scene outside the narrow window, where the trees swayed out of rhythm with the wind. A soft rustling whispered in the eaves, the only sound amid the thickening dusk. My eyes traced the outline of the garden, but the silhouette I expected to recognize refused to take shape. It was as if the world beyond the glass misremembered its own design. I stayed still, my breath barely a ripple in the quiet. Suddenly a gleam, metallic and brief, winked from the garden's edge, a detail I knew had no place among the leaves. The humming started before I could place it. Not electrical, not mechanical, but something that made my teeth ache. It came from beneath, maybe from within the walls themselves. The sound had texture thick like honey but sharp at the edges. When I pressed my ear to the plaster, the vibration traveled through my skull, settling behind my eyes. The smell followed, metallic copper mixed with something burning that wasn't quite smoke. My fingertips tingled against the wall's surface, and for a moment I swore I felt it pulse, a heartbeat that wasn't mine. Someone was watching. The certainty crept up my spine like cold water. I couldn't tell if my eyes were open or closed, if I was standing or lying down. The presence felt close enough to touch, yet when I turned, and I think I turned, nothing occupied the space beside me, but the air held warmth where a body might have been. My skin prickled with awareness, every nerve ending alert to movement that never came. The sensation of being observed pressed against me like a physical weight, and I wondered if I was the one doing the watching, looking at myself from somewhere else entirely. My thoughts scattered like startled birds. Words formed in my mind that I hadn't chosen, sentences that felt foreign on my mental tongue. The voice inside my head spoke with unfamiliar rhythms, asking questions I didn't want to answer. My reflection in the bathroom mirror seemed delayed, moving a fraction of a second after I did. When I reached for the faucet, my hand hesitated as if it belonged to someone else. The water ran cold, then scalding, then cold again, though I never touched the handles. I stared at my own eyes and couldn't shake the feeling that something else was looking back. Light exploded behind my eyelids, not white but silver blue, pulsing in patterns that hurt to perceive. The air crackled with electricity. I could taste metallic and sharp. Objects in the room shifted without moving, their edges blurring and reforming. The floor beneath my feet felt unstable, like standing on water that had forgotten how to be liquid. Sound disappeared completely, leaving only the sensation of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. When the brightness faded, shadows clung to corners where shadows had no right to exist, dark spots that seemed to absorb light rather than simply block it. The ringing never completely stops now. It lives in the space between my thoughts, a high-pitched whine that makes concentration impossible. My coffee tastes different, metallic and strange, as if the water itself has changed composition. Mirrors reflect my image with a slight delay, and sometimes I catch myself waiting for my reflection to catch up. My hands shake without reason, and when I touch doorknobs or light switches, static electricity jumps between my skin and the metal. Sleep comes in fragments, interrupted by the sensation of falling upward instead of down. But that's not how it happened. The light was warm, golden like afternoon sun, and it didn't hurt at all. I remember feeling peaceful, suspended in amber brightness that wrapped around me like a blanket. The objects in the room remained perfectly still, solid and reassuring. My feet were planted firmly on wooden floorboards that creaked in familiar places. The silence was complete but comforting, like being held underwater in a warm bath. When the glow faded, everything returned to exactly where it belonged, and I felt grateful rather than afraid. I don't try to understand anymore. Understanding requires connecting fragments into a whole, and these pieces refuse to fit together properly. Something fundamental shifted that night, or was it day? The world looks the same but feels different, like a photograph that's been altered so subtly you can't identify what changed. I've stopped looking directly at mirrors and started sleeping with the curtains drawn. The metallic taste comes and goes, and sometimes I catch myself listening for that humming sound in the walls. I've learned not to trust my first memory of things because the second version always contradicts it, and I can never be certain which one actually happened. What I know for sure is this: I'm no longer the same person who stood at that narrow window, and I'm not entirely convinced I want to remember why. Story 10. The premises were entered via an unlatched window at 07:42 hours. All interior doors remained closed, textiles undisturbed, and surfaces exhibited negligible dust accumulation. A single dinner plate was positioned on the dining table, with residual sauce congealed, suggesting an extended period of inactivity. Wall hangings were uniformly aligned, and all seating arrangements retained their original layout. The temperature control device registered an adjusted setting atypical for the season. Footwear impressions led consistently towards the exit point. No footprints returned. That report, those words, I remember reading them over and over, but they feel like they're describing someone else's life, someone else's house, someone else's plate with the dried marinara that I can still taste when I close my eyes, metallic and wrong. There's this sound that cuts through everything else, a low-frequency hum that seems to come from inside my skull rather than my ears. It starts soft, almost like the refrigerator cycling on, but then it builds until my teeth ache. I can't place when I first heard it. Was it before the window, after? The sound doesn't care about time. It just is, and it's always been, and maybe it always will be. Sometimes I catch the scent of ozone in rooms where there shouldn't be any electricity problems. Sharp and clean, like the air right before lightning strikes. My nose burns with it. The smell clings to my clothes, my skin, the inside of my nostrils. I've thrown away shirts that reeked of it, scrubbed my hands raw, but it comes back, always comes back. The feeling of being watched never really goes away anymore. It's not like someone's behind me, it's more like someone's inside the space I'm occupying, sharing it, breathing when I breathe. I'll be brushing my teeth or making coffee, and suddenly my movements feel choreographed, like I'm following steps someone else laid out. My hand reaches for the sugar before I've decided I want sugar. My head turns toward the window before I've heard any sound outside. I wake up sometimes with thoughts that don't belong to me, complete sentences in my head that I didn't think, technical phrases about atmospheric pressure and electromagnetic fields. Words I don't even understand but somehow know the meaning of. My brain feels crowded, like there's not enough room for everything that's trying to fit inside it. I'll start to write down these foreign thoughts, but my hand cramps up and the pen falls, every time. The light was wrong that night, not the color, not the brightness, but the way it moved. Light isn't supposed to move like that, pooling and flowing like liquid mercury across the walls. It came from everywhere and nowhere, casting shadows that pointed in impossible directions. My own shadow split into 3 distinct shapes, each one slightly out of sync with my movements. The air tasted copper and my skin felt electric, every hair standing on end. I can still feel the texture of that light on my face, warm but not comforting, invasive. It pressed against my eyelids even when I squeezed them shut. My breathing became shallow, automatic, like my body was running a program I hadn't authorized. The humming sound was loudest then, so loud it became a physical thing, pushing against my eardrums from the inside out. But that's not how it happened. The light was gentle, almost welcoming, soft blue-white like moonlight through frosted glass. It didn't move at all, just hung there in the air above my bed, perfectly still. I wasn't afraid. I felt calm, calmer than I'd been in months. My breathing was deep and regular. The humming sound was barely noticeable, more like a lullaby than anything threatening. I reached up toward the light, and it felt warm against my palm, like touching the surface of barely heated water. Which memory is real? They both feel true when I'm living inside them. They both leave the same residue, the same taste of copper pennies and burnt ozone, the same sense that something fundamental shifted that night, like a gear clicking into a new position inside a machine I can't see. My reflection looks different now, not older, not changed in any way I can point to, but different. Sometimes I catch myself in mirrors, and for just a moment I don't recognize the person looking back. The eyes are mine, but the expression isn't. There's a knowing there that I don't possess, a calm that I've never felt. It's like looking at a photograph of myself taken by someone else in a place I've never been. The temperature in my house runs cold now, no matter what I set the thermostat to. My breath fogs when I speak, and I find myself wearing sweaters in weather that should be warm, but my skin feels feverish, hot to the touch. The contradiction doesn't make sense, but it's constant. Hot and cold at the same time, like my body can't decide which temperature it's supposed to be. I've stopped trying to understand what happened that night. Understanding feels dangerous now, like picking at a scab that's better left alone. Some knowledge isn't meant to be assembled into neat, logical sequences. Some experiences are meant to stay fragmented, scattered across time like broken glass. The footprints that led to the window but never came back. That detail haunts me more than anything else, because I remember walking to that window. I remember the cool night air on my face, the rough texture of the sill under my palms, but I don't remember walking back. I don't remember how I got from the window to my bed, where I woke up the next morning with the taste of metal in my mouth and the sound of humming in my ears. Maybe I never did walk back. Maybe some part of me is still there at that window, looking out into the darkness, waiting for something to look back. Maybe that's why my reflection seems so strange, why my thoughts sometimes feel borrowed, why the light moves in ways that light shouldn't move. I don't want to remember any more than I already do. Some puzzles aren't meant to be solved. Some memories are better left as fragments, sharp and disconnected, too dangerous to piece together into something whole. The humming is getting louder as I think about it, and the air is starting to taste like copper again. I think I'll stop here.